Hello everyone, my name is Cliff and welcome back to my channel. This is Cliff's Dark Gems. Today, in honor of Old School April, the Watchathon, I'm going to be doing a video on my top 10 70s movies, or horror movies of all time. Please stay tuned. Okay everyone, so later on in the month I'll be releasing a top 10 80s horror movies of all time, as well as a top 10 90s horror movies of all time. This is obviously in addition to my book content that I've been doing on this channel. The 70s was an awesome decade of horror films, where boundaries were tested, where limits were tested, and really some of the most iconic movies in cinema history came from that era. I know a lot of films might seem outdated now when you look at some modern pieces of horror filmmaking, but so many classics in that era. There are so many classic horror novels that have stood the test of time, and I would like to present some of them to you here today. Okay, I'm going to first of all give two honourable mentions that don't necessarily fall directly under the genre of horror, but I think deserve a place on this list, just to mention anyway. First of all, we have the musical stroke comedy stroke horror classic, cult classic, that is the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Now, I watched this back when I was a teen, and the first time I actually saw it, it was basically, what the hell is this? I don't know what I'm watching. Didn't really appreciate it, and it took a little while when I was a little bit older, a little bit more nostalgic, to really get into the music and the vibes and just the old school delight that this movie is all about. This movie is sort of a spoof, does a spoof on the haunted house trope, and you know, with the kind of all the unsettling stuff that goes on there on a stormy night. And it is very hilarious. There are a lot of sexual innuendos, there are a lot of sexual misadventures goings on, but that's just all very camp and what makes the story so attractive. It is also, as I said, it is a cult classic, and it is the kind of movie that is better to watch when you're in a group of friends and you're in a kind of light-hearted mood, and then you can dance a time warp and you can appreciate the music for what it is. Next up we have Jaws from 1975. Now this is in many people's books a horror movie, and yes, thinking about it, it would probably be on this list, but a lot of people classify it maybe as a horror stroke thriller. Nevertheless, it is a terrifying tale of a monstrous man-eating shark that is basically attacking people on a beach in a small seaside town. The beach shouldn't have been open, but it was. The mayor kept the beach open, and now men are out on the hunt for this man-eating shark. And it is truly terrifying. The music adds to the suspense. The music adds to the whole feel of this shark and this threat under the water, and you can't see it and you don't know where it is. But that, I don't even know how it goes, but that really adds to the feel of the movie. If we look at Jaws on a deeper level, we have to question really, who is the villain of the piece? Is it the shark, or is it the men hunting the shark? Jaws, the shark, is just acting according to its nature as a beast, as an animal, whereas the man hunting it really, it might be more about ego than actually about saving the town. And that is just something I think that's worthwhile keeping in mind when you watch the movie, because I think there were ramifications, there were consequences after the movie was released, so that's something worth thinking about. However, on a shallow level, just watching the movie level, it is terrifying, and it is a great piece of cinema making, filmmaking that has stood the test of time. Okay, let's get to our list, shall we? In 10th position we have a very strange, bizarre weird, dreamlike movie called Phantasm, which was released in 1979. And this contains a very creepy villain called the Tall Man, who is perhaps one of the more underrated villains in horror history. Now, in this small town, he is capturing the bodies of dead people, and we don't know who he is yet, and he carries them off, and these two kids, these two boys, want to find out what the hell's going on in their town. What made this movie so great for me was not necessarily the full story. It was just that it was so super weird and almost dreamlike, almost trippy. And there are some scenes in there with this weird flying sphere from the Tall Man that has these hooks on the end that capture you in your skull, and then something almost gives you like a lobotomy. A lot of blood spurting, but it's not overly gory. It's just a very original take on the horror filmmaking, and I just thought it was brilliant, and it's underrated. Next we have Italian filmmaker Dario Argento in ninth position with Suspiria, which was released in 1977. Now, the best thing about this movie is its awesome cinematography. Its visuals are so stunning and colourful, and the soundtrack is just gorgeous. And so it's almost like you are feeling the movie instead of just experiencing the story, which is a little bit crazy anyway. Sometimes you don't know what's going on. But the actual visuals and everything it does just makes this movie what it is. It is about a coven of witches that basically hide out in this dance theatre, I think, dance academy, and these students that go there and that they murdered, and there's just strange goings on, and really it's more about feeling and experiencing this movie as opposed to watching a story. And I think that's the case with a lot of Argento's filmmaking. The girl with the crystal plumage, I think, is one of his first, and yeah, that's what makes the story stunning. So go in there not expecting this spectacular story, but go in there expecting to feel this, have this amazing experience of visuals, of sound, of something completely different in horror. Okay, in eighth position we have Carrie by Stephen King. This was released in 1976, and to be honest, I didn't really want to put it on this list because in many ways I actually hated this movie. I hate the idea of bullying at school, and Carrie is this child that is bullied relentlessly, and she has this psychic power that she doesn't know about yet, but this is quite a hard watch sometimes. The scene in the shower, there are other scenes with these boys and the way they treat her, and it's a hard watch, and to be honest it was also a hard read for me. But I have to say that the climax, without giving anything away, is one of the truly most terrifying, most effective moments in cinema, and really when all hell breaks loose, it's just something to behold. So that is why it's on this list. The rest of the story I found unpleasant and difficult to read. That is Carrie. In seventh position we have, in my mind, an underrated classic, The Abominable Dr. Phibes, released in 1971. And now this movie I watched when I was a young kid, perhaps way too young. I think I was about 11 or 12 at the time, and my parents weren't at home. I actually ended up watching quite a few movies that way, and really it's a dark gem, and it is dark humour, and I really, when I think back on this, I think back on it very fondly. I don't know how well it's aged, but I think it's still, I would actually watch it again. I think it's probably aged quite well. It is about a mad doctor, an insane doctor, who loses his wife while she's on the operating table after a car accident, and he blames the 9 doctors that are there in the theatre, and he plots his revenge against them. And now what he does is he uses the 9 biblical plagues, and the death scenes make this movie. They are so creative, they are so original, using things like rats and locusts and It is just such a weird movie, so filled with grim humour, but it's well worth your time. In sixth position we have a very dark, chilling movie called Don't Look Now. Now, it's one of those movies that don't rely on special effects, it doesn't rely on cheap thrills or goriness or blood, but rather in the mood, in the setting, and just in the minds of the characters. It is a deeply effective movie. A couple's young daughter at the beginning of the movie drowns, and she's wearing a red sort of a swim jacket. And later on we find the couple in Venice. Number one, they're trying to get away from their problems. Number two, the man, John, is actually working there, working on an old church. Now, the colour red is very symbolic, and you find it throughout the movie, and as well as the idea of water. Because don't you think it's kind of ironic that their daughter drowns, and one place where they're trying to get away from water, or the idea of her drowning, is in Venice, with all the canals and the water surrounding them. So it is a very interesting movie. And it also, the actual setting of Venice you normally associate with being sort of a lover's paradise. It is, the scene is anything like that. It is gloomy, it is empty streets, empty hotels, there's a serial killer on the loose, and so there's all sorts of stuff going on in this movie. It just gives it a grim atmosphere, it gives it a grim tone. The ending of this movie is particularly shocking and violent and traumatic, and you don't see it coming, or perhaps you do if you paid attention throughout the movie. I'm not going to go into any spoilers, but it is something that you think about quite a long way after, when the final credits roll. You think about this particular ending. In fifth place we have 1973's The Wicker Man. Now, this is a seriously messed up movie that will give you some serious vibes of, Midsummer. It is perhaps the first folk horror, the origin of folk horrors, and please, whatever you do, for goodness sake, don't watch the Nicolas Cage remake. That has to be one of the most awful movies of all times. Really, just terrible movie on every level. This original, however, is very effective. And it's about a police sergeant who is called out to a remote Scottish island to investigate a missing girl case. And what he finds there, now he's a devout Christian, what he finds there on the island is that it's just being taken over by paganism. People have renounced Christianity, and there's just this weird sense of these rituals, half-naked people running about. On every level it goes against what he believes in, and it's something that comes up in this movie time and time again. You know, the conflict between belief systems, between paganism and religion, and paganism and Christianity. And right towards the end, I won't give anything away, you see this play out. But it is a very, very effective movie, and it is creepy, and it is disturbing, and it also makes us question our morals and our values and think about who we are really as people, and I just found it a highly effective movie. In fourth position we have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre of 1974. Now, this is not necessarily a brilliant movie by any stretch of the imagination. It is very low budget, it is very grimy, grotty, but it is very effective. When the movie was released, it was said to be based on true events. Now, this was nonsense, except for the fact that there is a very, very sort of subtle or small nod to a serial killer named Ed Gein, who used to basically rob graves and decorate his house with the bones of human beings and the skin of human beings, and there's a nod to that in this movie. But besides that, this, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know, is not based on any true story. It is very grim, it's very violent. However, it's violent without actually showing too much in terms of blood or gore. There's a lot of screaming, a lot of running about, with it, you know, the chainsaw wielding guy, Leatherface, and okay, it's highly effective in what it intends to do, which is to terrify the audience. It doesn't really have much more of a plot, besides the fact that these people are in a camper van and they go stop where they shouldn't stop, you know, abandoned house, and then they visit this neighbouring farmhouse one at a time. They go in, they disappear. Hey, what? Let's just keep going in there. But yeah, it's just fun. I found it a lot better than The Hills of Eyes, mainly because The Hills of Eyes goes to very cruel places with that rape, and I didn't particularly enjoy that. But this actually is also the beginning of the slasher genre. This movie is credited to actually begin that particular genre. I really enjoyed it. That is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now we're getting to three of my absolute favourites, not just in the 70s but of all time, possibly. The first one is Alien with Sigourney Weaver. Now this is a true horror classic, and it just, that whole sci-fi horror thing, I'm not normally into that. This is a huge exception to the rule. You've got this claustrophobia, you've got this absolute sense of terror and dread, and you've got Sigourney Weaver absolutely kicking ass. You know, this is a movie where she comes into her own as this powerful heroine. Just everything about this movie is class. The one thing I really like about it, and it makes it so different to so much modern cinema, is the pacing. Is that it takes its time. It's not just cheap thrills. The long moments in between the sections where there's horror and there's death and there's where it's a slow building of tension and dread, and you've got nowhere to go in a spaceship. It's just truly terrifying, and it's done so well. The acting is so good. I think the special effects are just ahead of its time, and the alien creature, wow, that really is something horrifyingly scary. And at first it's not, you only really get the reveal at the end of what this thing looks like as an adult. At first when they find the eggs, and you know, I don't want to go into huge spoilers, but I think most of you know the story. It is well worth watching, and it is one of those 70s movies that more than hold up today. That is Alien. And in second position we have Damien Omen 2, which is obviously the second in a trilogy. The first one is Damien Omen, and then the final is The Final Conflict. Now this is about the birth of the Antichrist, and basically he grows up into adulthood. In the first one he's an infant and a child, and it's a classic movie. But there's a specific reason why I like the second one more, and more than the third one as well, particularly. Actually, The Final Conflict was a little bit of a letdown, but I still enjoyed it as a closure to the story. In the second movie, Damien is a 13-year-old, and like any 13-year-old boy, he is going through an identity crisis. He's going through adolescence. He's changing. Though you think like he's the Antichrist, but he's going through these changes. He needs to discover who he is, and that makes this movie a lot more interesting for me. I'm not going to give away too much of the plot, because actually it's a good idea to go back to the beginning of the series and watch the first movie, Damien Omen, before you move on with the series. But I will say that this is possibly the first horror movie that I ever watched. Once again, I was alone with my brothers, and this is not something we were supposed to watch. And I was 10 years old, and I had nightmares for quite a while, and it was based on three things. This crazy woman, her eyes, a crow, and a large truck. I'm not going to say anything else, but that particular scene in that movie just stayed with me. And there are, throughout the movie and through the first movie as well, there's some very creative deaths involved of people who find out who he is, or are getting too close to finding out who he is and what he is about. That is Damien Omen 2. And in first position we have one of my favourite horror movies of all time, and that's George R. Romero, Dawn of the Dead. Now he started off with Night of the Living Dead in the 60s, which was brilliant, but then in Dawn of the Dead it is just perfected it. And this movie is just iconic, and it is has been made and remade, and others have copied it, but it is such an influence on the zombie genre. It is truly gory. And when I say gory, I mean not everyone will be able to sit through some of the scenes in this movie. It is bloody, it's disgusting. But at the same time, what runs through the story is this dark humor as well. And in between the absolutely traumatic zombie action that happens, you get some incredibly hilarious scenes. I mean, I just remember the one where the zombie's trying to go up the down escalator of the shopping mall. And that's another thing. It takes place in a shopping mall. The survivors end up there fighting for their lives, also fighting with each other. So there's a lot of commentary going on in this movie. It's not just this gory, bloody, disgusting movie. They're fighting with each other, against each other, and there's a big commentary on the fact that it takes place in a shopping mall, in a huge shopping mall. It's a take on human consumerism and greed and things like that. So there's all sorts of other stuff attached to this movie. But really, it's been copied and it's been remade, and there's nothing like this as an original piece. Another thing I love about these older movies, and not just Dawn of the Dead, a lot of them in particular, is that it takes its time in the old movies. It takes its time to build characters and to develop characters, so you get to know the characters. Whereas a lot of modern movies, a lot of modern horror movies, they might look better, they might sound better, but it's just a big rush. And the nice thing about Dawn of the Dead is just a small group of characters. You get to know all of their different character arcs. You get to know what they're fighting for, what they're about. And if some of them die, you actually feel it. You become invested in them. It's a little bit like a good novel as well. The characters are very important. And so even though some of these movies that I've been talking about might seem dated, might seem just old-fashioned, and rather just put something new and snazzy on, I like the fact that there are still a lot of strengths when watching these older movies. So everyone, that's my top 10 70s horror movies. I understand that I left some big names out there, but that's fine. You can point that out to me in the comment sections below. Just be gentle, and please leave a comment and like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and take care everyone. In this case, it's not about keep those pages turning, it's about keep watching that horror. Cheers. Take care.